The snow had fallen early that year. It lay thick upon the crooked roofs of the town, clung to the bare branches of the lindens, and softened even the hardest lines of stone and timber. Smoke rose slowly from the chimneys, for fuel was precious and fires were kept small. The river at the edge of town crept along under a skin of ice, dark and patient. It was Christmastide in medieval Germany. Not Christmas as we know it, bright, brief, and impatient, but a season long anticipated, deeply felt, and hard-earned. For most souls, the feast came at the end of a long hunger. By December, the fields had been silent for weeks. The harvest was long stored or already eaten. What remained was measured carefully: sacks of rye, barrels of cabbage, sides of pork, hanging stiff with salt. In peasants' houses, meals had grown thinner as the days shortened. Bread was dark and dense, baked from rye or barley, pottage ever present, bubbled with peas or beans, flavored more by memory of meat than meat itself. Ale was weak but warming. Advent had sharpened this restraint. The church encouraged fasting and moderation. Desire was to be disciplined. Appetite was to wait. So when Christmas came, it arrived not with noise but with meaning. On Christmas morning, before any table was laid, bells rang. Men and women rose before dawn, wrapping themselves in wool cloaks, stamping warmth into frozen feet. Inside the churches, candles flickered against stone and pine branches scented the air. Latin words of the priests rolled on, solemn and ancient, carrying the story of a child born into cold and poverty. The people understood this part well. In the low houses of the village, Christmas meals were prepared with care. There was no excess here, only difference. A loaf of rye bread, baked finer than usual, sat at the center of the table. Pottage was thickened with bacon fat, saved for several weeks. Salted pork was boiled, its broth treasured as much as the meat itself. Cabbage, often fermented into sauerkraut, added sour warmth to the plate. If fortune had been kind, there might be sausage made after Martinmas, which was on the 11th of November, or a goose, shared among neighbors. Honey, precious and golden, was drizzled sparingly on bread, a sweetness remembered long after it was gone. Ale flowed more freely today. In some villages, a stronger Christmas brew was drawn from the cask, dark and warming, filling the room with cheer and laughter. Nothing was wasted. Bones were cracked for marrow, crusts were soaked in broth, fat scraped carefully from pots. This was not indulgence. It was a celebration, a feast that they had waited all year and saved their most precious foods for. Elsewhere, obligation opened doors. At monasteries and manor houses, the poor gathered. Bread was handed out, stew was ladled into waiting bowls, ale was poured with a steady hand. A German lord was expected to give at Christmas. Generosity was not merely kindness, it was a duty, proof that authority carried responsibility. To withhold food at Christmastide was to invite both earthly resentment and heavenly judgment. For many, these alms were not symbolic, they were survival. In the great halls of castles and city councils, Christmas announced itself with ceremony. Evergreen boughs hung from the beams darkened by the years of smoke. Torches flared, long tables filled the hall, and servants moved briskly, bearing the weight of the season. At the high table sat the Lord and his guests. Before them came roasted boar, its head presented whole, tusks gleaming. Venison from winter hunts followed, then beef, capon, and joints of meat richly spiced. White bread, soft, fine, and costly, was torn by practiced hands. Sauces carried the sharpness of mustard and vinegar, the luxury of pepper and cloves, brought from distant lands. Wine flowed freely, deep and warming. For honored guests, hippocras, wine sweetened with honey and spice, closed the chill from the bones. At the end of the day came dried fruits, nuts, honey, and cakes, pressed into careful shapes. Sugar was rare. Honey ruled the table. And yet, even here, order prevailed. Where one sat determined what one ate. The Lord first, then knights, then retainers, then servants, and leftovers were gathered and not discarded to be eaten later or given away. Food in medieval Germany was the hierarchy made visible. In cities like Nuremberg or Cologne, Christmas had its own rhythm. Guilds hosted feasts, bakers supplied special loaves, butchers brought sausages. Brewers rolled out barrels kept for just the season. Near churches, vendors sold roasted nuts and spiced wine, steam rising into the cold air. The streets smelled of smoke and meat and warmth. Christmas did not always end on the 25th, for 12 days work slowed, and oftentimes lasted until February 2nd. Guests came and went. Leftovers were remade into stews and dumplings. Bread grew stale, then useful again. Ale was warmed against the frost. By Epiphany, stores were low, winter still lay ahead, but the people had endured the darkest point of the year. To modern eyes, these meals may have seemed plain. To medieval Germans, they were everything. They were proof that God had not forgotten them, that hunger could be paused, that neighbors mattered, that winter could be faced, not alone, but together. In candlelit rooms, with bowls passed and bread broken slowly, Christmas was not about excess. It was about enough. And in a world where enough was rare, that miracle itself was enough. If you enjoyed the video, please like and consider subscribing. These stories are kept alive when they are shared. Thank you very much.